one example, synesthesia. So some people have a blending of the senses. So maybe they look at letters and it triggers a color experience, or they hear music and it puts taste in their mouth, or they taste something and puts a feeling on their fingertips, things like that. Their senses are mixed more. It's not a disease or a disorder. It's just an alternative way of consciously perceiving the world. So we can look for what the physical differences are, which are like, a mutation in a gene, just a little tiny thing here, and then you're perceiving differently than I am. That's actually another example of something that used to be, in my mind, for me personally, it was a philosophical conundrum, which is, okay, is it possible that I see red differently than you see red? And so on. That felt to me, when I was learning about those in classes, like a cool question, and I couldn't figure out how to answer it. But now I've studied, 64,000 synesthetes. I've put together the world's largest database of synesthetes, we've done brain imaging, all this stuff. And now we can really get somewhere on this question. Okay, look, we know these people are perceiving something differently than these people. So what is the difference physically, genetically, and how that maps on their consciousness? So that's the kind of thing that I'm doing on that point.
Let's digress from consciousness for a little bit and then come back to it, because I want to hear more about the synesthesia. So it seems like you are one of the leading researchers on synesthesia. You've probably spent more time with synesthetes than most people. What are some of the most fascinating cases of synesthesia that you've come across? Or what are some of the experiments that you've run on synesthetes to prove that they're not just making things up about synesthesia?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I did way back in 2007 was I said, now it's trivial, but at the time it was the first of its kind thing of, instead of bringing synesthetes into the lab by posting with flyers and having them come in and testing them that way, I made an online synesthesia battery that's uncheatable. And that's what blew things up from having a few synesthetes. Everybody who had papers on synesthesia just had like an N of 4 to, now we're dealing with tens of thousands. But the test essentially is, let's say you have letters to colors synesthesia. So I present on the screen a letter, and I give you a color palette with which you can choose any of 16 million different colors displayable on a computer monitor. And you find exactly the color that's generated with that letter, and then you press submit, you see the next letter at random. So what happens is you see all the letters and numbers 3 times each in random order. And each time you're picking a color. Well, it turns out if you're a synesthete, it's trivially easy for you to, pick the same color each time for the letter J and then the letter T and so on. But with if you're not a synesthete, I ask people, okay, use a free memory, use your memory, use free association, use whatever you want to try to remember what you did. So people are terrible at it, because it's really hard out of 60 million colors to remember what you called, M 57 trials ago out of all these colors. So anyway, it's a way that I can very sensibly discriminate real synesthetes from malingerers. So that's helped a lot, just in terms of knowing, as you said, who is telling the truth about it. And then we do brain imaging experiments. We've been doing genetics on this for a long time, actually. We haven't quite found the gene yet. We found a hot spot on chromosome 16. What's interesting about this, I just want to mention that when you're doing genetics and you're looking for a question about someone's conscious experience, they're so distant, these issues, that no matter what gene I find here, we're all going to scratch our heads and say, what? It's going to be some protein has a slightly different amino acid here, and that spins all the way up to a completely different experience of the world. That's weird.
Well, I have a number of questions about the synesthetes. I think the first question that comes to mind is, so you used the letter J, for example. When a synesthete associates J with a specific color, is it the case that when they see a J on the page in black ink, they see it as green, or does their whole visual experience just have like a green color filter on it? Just what is changing about their experience of the world as a consequence of observing the J? Yeah.
What's interesting is they know that it's in black ink. They can see it's black ink, but to them it's self-evidently true that J is green. And so for example, if I asked you to picture a pumpkin sitting here, and I said, what color is it? You'd say orange. But I'd say, well, are you hallucinating orange? You're not you're not thinking the whole world's orange, but it's like obvious to you that thing you're imagining is orange. And that's exactly what it is for a synesthete. And there's all these different forms of synesthesia, but it's essentially the same thing in all of them. It's not a hallucination, but just those things are the same thing. Jay and green to them is one thing. Yeah.
This is only a family resemblance of examples, but I read Dennett's Consciousness Explained in high school, and I believe he has this example. He says, picture a purple cow. You've done it. Now, where is the purple cow? Because there is no purple cow in your brain, but you're still having this experience of a purple cow. When the synesthete sees the J, they're associating it with green. What is happening in their brain that is giving them this green experience that is not connected to something that is actually green in the world?
Yeah. You've got areas that are involved in color perception in your visual system. So when you picture the orange pumpkin, you're tickling those cells. There's a much deeper story behind this, which I'll just mention in a sense. We can drill in more if you want. But, if you look at the visual cortex, only 5% of the input to the visual cortex is coming from the eyes. All the rest is feedback connections. Yeah, all the rest is feedback connections. So most of vision is about internal activity that is merely modulated by a little bit of data that's dribbling in through these spheres in your skull. That's it. So, so it's no surprise that we can imagine orange or green or things like that, because most of it's all feedback in any case. So it turns out that this thing about letters and colors is one of the most common forms of synesthesia. And it turns out that the brain areas involved in letters and the brain areas involved in colors sit right next to each other. And so presumably what we all think is the case is that there's just more crosstalk. There's just a little bit more of a porous border there between those two areas, letters and colors, that are just talking to each other a little bit more. It's like a country with, with porous immigration borders. There's just more activity going. Yeah.
Is synesthesia ever debilitating for people, or is it just novel and interesting for a neuroscientist?
It's the latter. It's just novel and interesting for neuroscientists. What's very interesting is a lot of people assume that people with synesthesia have a more creative life or something. But in fact, if every time you look at Jay, you think green, that's not creativity, that you're stuck in that rut. It's just an alternative perceptual reality. That's the weird part about it. And so for people with synesthesia, the crazy part is that even as recently as when I give talks on this, maybe 15 years ago, and I would talk about this to an audience and ask who's ever heard of synesthesia. Most people have not even heard the term 15 or 20 years ago. Now it's somehow leaked into public consciousness, which is wonderful. But the point is, people with synesthesia would sometimes sit in the audience and they'd be so surprised by learning that, wait a minute, 97% of the people in the audience don't experience what I'm experiencing. Why? Because we all assume that everyone experiences reality exactly the way that we do. And so, that's just their reality. And they were surprised to learn that there was this label and that other people didn't have it that way.